Welcome to the Chris Andrew podcast. I'm your host, Chris Andrew, and I'm trying to better understand the world by talking to interesting people on compelling topics. And today, I'm talking with Dr. Jamie Freestone. Jamie's a post-doctoral fellow at the Australian National University, where he looks at the philosophy of autonomous systems. He's a brilliant mind, and we're going to talk about future technologies. Thanks for joining us, and enjoy the show. Hey, Jamie, I've warned you that I want to talk about breakthrough science, things that are actually going to change the species, because I was thinking amidst all the news that we get for AI and things like that, we've had like a lot of step shift technologies in the last couple of decades. I think a few that we're still sort of figuring out. It's obvious there are a few that are still leveling out through society and how they're going to impact us. But I feel like there's a growing sense that this wonder future that was promised to everybody doesn't feel like it's any closer, or that it's delivering anything other than sort of an enshittification in a few ways. So I thought it'd be interesting to talk about, AI absolutely promises the same, but currently it feels like just a lot of marketers getting images generated that look a bit shit.
Yeah, definitely.
So what are the other things on the horizon? We may only end up talking about one or two because they're very big topics. So we'll see how we go. I don't want to promise too much, but I wanted to hear your thoughts, because I know you're a man of thought in the world.
As you didn't say science. Yeah, well, so one, I guess, take on that whole thing is that, I guess, information technologies, broadly conceived, are maybe not the things to look for those step changes, because the idea would be that, well, when you have the development of the newspaper or the development of the internet or smartphone, or now, generative AI, yes, you sort of change the informational landscape and the way that people can consume media or the way they can get information. But that generally brings with it some mix of like liberation and constraint. And, after an initial period of disruption, people sort of settle back to some kind of equilibrium because they learn how to live with that new flow of information, and they find ways to counteract, the misinformation that comes with it, or to, accept the enshittification of it, or whatever. And then the technologies to look for that actually change the real fabric of everyday life, or the human condition, or something like that, are generally technologies that change something about our bodies or our health, or more the kind of the ecology that we live in. And so the obvious examples there would be like, birth control and vaccines. And they have like, another way of looking at this is that there's that idea that, if you take a photograph of like a living room in 2025 and a photograph of a living room in like 1975, they kind of look about the same, other than the screens that are in that room. Like, obviously there'd be like a flat screen TV and a bunch of, smartphones in today's image, but otherwise like the stuff is not that different. Whereas if you compare 1975 with 1925, the fabric of everyday life had changed significantly, just with the advent of like a whole bunch of things that had happened in the previous 50 years that had actually changed stuff like how we move around, like the development of the automobile, or, actually augmented the way that we interact with everyday life, rather than just the way that we get our information. So this, by the way, is an idea cobbled together from a bunch of different people, but most recently said by a guy called, and I'm glancing at the name on the book here, Dan
NFT.
Davies. A guy called Dan Davies, who just wrote this excellent book last year called The Unaccountability Machine, which is all about like corporations and AI and a bunch of interesting stuff. Anyway, but he sort of makes this point about information technology, and I kind of buy it. So my very basic take on this would be that the technologies to look out for in the next few years that will have those bigger impacts are going to be like the weird biotech things, like artificial worms and gene therapy and embryo selection and all that creepy stuff, because that will kind of actually change something about what it means to be human today versus what it was like being human, 1,000 years ago. Whereas maybe the AI and the NFTs and stuff like that, although obviously new and at the vanguard, don't utterly transform our lives. So I don't know. That's been my kind of take on that recently. The question is, will the next paradigm of AI be something beyond a simple information technology and something beyond a simple increase in the way that we get information or produce information, which is, I guess, what the current thing sort of looks like? or will it actually change the way we interact with each other? And certainly there are visions of AI that would involve that as well, but it's not clear that they're really around the corner. Yeah, so I don't know. Does that add to your question?
Yeah. I mean, it certainly gives us a good launching point. I want to put AI to the side for a moment because I think there's a lot. I think we're all familiar with what the discourses are there. What you said about the living room has really struck me because I think that whilst the photos would appear the same from 1975 and today, I think there are some significant changes that maybe do again point to the material rather than just the information space, the material differences, because it's something that I've come to lament is that if you get like a piece of furniture now, it's much harder to get something that's just actually good rather than, chipboard that's stapled and then covered to look like wood and then leather that's dyed a million times. Oh, I don't know. I'm not a furniture expert, but I just think
It's true. You have to buy furniture from 1975, actually, if you want to.
Exactly. And not just furniture, but anything. I mean, my friend Potsy buys microwaves from the 70s because he knows that they'll last 50 years and that he can fix them if they break, which is, I mean, very impressive at an individual level, but damning considering all the various technologies that we've had since. And I think the big difference between 1975 and 1925 that you'd find would be because of the explosion in our productivity because of materials and industrial manufacturing and various plastics and things like that. And that's sort of a bit of a grim and uninteresting trend. But there are sort of certain step shifts that you can see happening, whether it be 3D printing or I don't know. And this is where you will know more than me, I imagine. It's just the creation, the sort of end to certain scarcities that we have now. Certain resources are very difficult to obtain, and we need them for certain things. But maybe around the corner there's a way to, I don't know, rearrange molecules so that we can have whatever easily accessible and sort of end, the sort of resource based experience of the world that we have at the moment. Are there things like that might happen?
I mean, yeah, like maybe. So people. Well, I guess the real frontier technology there would be like nanotechnology, where for a while people have been talking about desktop fabrication or, rearranging molecules to kind of make whatever we want from scratch. I think that's a fair way off. And I guess 3D printing would be an example of like a stepping stone towards that technology. Obviously,
and
3D
also
printing.
Another great example of like where you think, oh, this is going to revolutionize anything, or you can print stuff in your house, but what do you actually get? Like, I mean, the only 3D printing that comes into mind is whenever there's news of someone 3D printing a gun, or on my Facebook marketplace, there's someone selling Viktor Orban's statues for like $10. I'm always tempted to buy for everyone I know.
Yeah,
that's about it. I know people 3D print parts and things like that when they repair things, but that's not a
totally
every person experience.
Well, I'm glad that it's disrupted the Orban figurine industry, because I like even when a few years ago I read about some guy who printed his own like orthodontic stuff or whatever.
All right.
The idea being that, oh great, instead of dentists having a monopoly over the orthodontics trade or whatever and charging thousands and thousands of dollars, you could 3D print something for like $11 or whatever it was. And I was like, oh great, wait for this, dentist, you've had it too good for too long. But sadly it turns out you need a bunch of other expertise to fit all that stuff, and now dentists will 3D print some of the orthodontists.
So they've improved their profit margins.
They have. They did really well there.
That's great.
So the 3D printing, I mean, and also like generally the idea that productivity has increased between 1975 and now, that's kind of true, and it's certainly led to manufacturers making cheaper, more shorter lived products with planned obsolescence and all that kind of thing. That's definitely, I guess, part of the shittification that you referred to earlier. But I think it's kind of, the jury's out on whether or not there has actually been a massive increase in productivity in that exact time period, though. Because and again, this is not my idea, but there are some billionaires out there who complain that this is the case. They'll sort of say like, where is my flying car? I think is the kind of slogan for this view. that although China's manufacturing methods and cheap labor have led to massive proliferation of cheaper goods and parts in countries that import from them. If you kind of break down the figures and look at productivity per worker in somewhere like the United States, it kind of was shooting up for large parts of the 20th century as new manufacturing methods, new technologies for making other technologies, new management techniques, all that sort of stuff was sort of improving. But arguably there's been a bit of a plateau since then. And then different economists will argue over whether or not that is actually the case and how you interpret the figures and everything. But that view of things says that, even though it's gotten a lot easier to get like really cheap electronics or even cheap furniture or whatever, we have not experienced any kind of like real economic gains in terms of having, new products like flying cars and things like that in the intervening 50 years, whereas our very recent ancestors in the 1970s did experience gains compared to when they were children, because
the washing machine, or they don't have to draw water from a well, or whatever it is.
all that sort of stuff. So again, like that's not exactly my area of expertise, but I can see how that's plausible. Again, I guess it would link back to the idea that it's hard maybe sometimes to predict in advance exactly how technologies will affect things. Like obviously you can predict in advance normally if a technology will be, roughly speaking, profitable, or if people will want it, for its intended purpose. But then imagining the second order effects of how it then affects other parts of the economy and how it changes, people's, relations with one another, or how they interrelate with work or whatever, is always hard to predict. I guess the obvious recent example would be something like video calls and stuff like Zoom and things that came to the fore during the pandemic. Some people would say, well, it's not like we all just do video calls all the time now and none of us go to the office. But it's also true that like more of us go to the office less frequently, and then the flow-on effect from that has been to actually change what a lot of downtowns or city centers look like, because cafes and restaurants have closed, and it's actually kind of changed the physical geography of some places. Mm-hmm. I don't know what my point is there, except that it's certainly hard to predict the impact of future technology. So,
yeah. And I like that, because that flows on to, even if things do cause a particular step shift in capacity or or potential, these like our lived experience kind of does seem to regress to a very human, natural level anyway. I think about like if you'd taken me in my teenage years and said, hey, in your adulthood, you're going to have in your pocket a portal to all the world's information, and you can contact anybody in an instant. Imagine the gods that everybody will be. It might conjure an image of humanity and a function and a productivity and an evolution that is probably the exact opposite of the sort of zombification consciousness hijack that those devices seem to serve for most of us as.
That's a great example, because they're you have a new information technology, the smartphone, which kind of, I guess, arguably was just a packaging together of existing information technologies, but all in one device now. And that did have a massive impact. Who knows what it even is yet? But I think clearly there seems to be some relationship between, people who came of age after 2008 or whatever, and mental health issues and whatever, a million different things. That the impact there was not so much arguably that it was easier to take photographs now and easier to surf the web or whatever. The impact seems to have been that it's affected our nervous systems, because it was kind of attention grabbing technology that has actually changed the way our dopamine cycles work on a 24-hour basis. But again, if you were following my idea from what I said earlier, you might have predicted that the smartphone would just be some new way of getting information that won't drastically change things. And in one sense, that's true, but in another sense, it actually did have an impact on the human body. And those
let's make everybody's thumbs big and take a few hours of sleep off of everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
And make everybody constantly unhappy at a level.
Yeah.
It's great for the vape industry. I mean, maybe Big Vape is behind smartphone.
Wouldn't that be wow?
What a reveal.
Yeah, it would make sense. That's a great reveal.
But there are other things that can come that you mentioned earlier that and again, who knows how they'd be used, because will they just be used to make state actors be superior at destroying their enemies, or I don't know, people masturbate and get angry at each other or whatever at a hyper level. The like CRISPR and technologies like that, where you can where we can edit our genes, that's we're sort of we are absolutely at the dawn of those possibilities. With I know there are examples of editing genes to remove certain diseases and things like that we know are connected. But take that to its extreme, and like how you can designer babies and whatever else. What like that sounds like the type of thing that really would have a huge difference. I mean, even just in the way that the contraceptive pill upset the social order of mating and partnering, in the same way this could have another a further example of that again.
Well, yeah, I mean, we'd get rid of left-handers for a start, presumably with the advent of CRISPR and embryo selection. But
sorry, you cut out for a second there. I just gonna have to ignore what you said.
Okay. It was just a eugenics rant. Don't worry.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean this would be my bet if there was some kind of horrible betting market for how these technologies will crush people in the future.
I bet there is.
It's called the stock market. Yeah, but like my bet would be something like CRISPR will have massive impact, but it's kind of impossible to see exactly what they'll be, because there'll be like some thing that we kind of eliminate, and then in eliminating that, it will have effects on the economy or on the social fabric that we won't have anticipated. And so obviously I can't guess what those will be, but presumably just changing effectively the genetics of the population to remove a certain kind of disease, or maybe to get rid of one sort of health problem that then has downstream effects, because it means we don't buy a bunch of the things that we used to buy, or certain healthcare professions disappear or whatever, but then increases some other health problem that was unforeseen, and that changes, like that seems to me to be something that we cannot plan for, but will definitely be a feature of our lives in a few decades. And embryo selection is the same kind of thing, where people can increasingly, of course, kind of select embryos in the sense that people in most countries now are given the option of terminating a pregnancy if, some genetic screening test tells them that there's some severe congenital issue with the fetus. But that's obviously already happening. And who knows if in 50 years we have a different looking population pyramid just because of even that thing that's been going for like a few years.
Inevitably, you would think.
Well, yeah, inevitably.
Yeah.
But obviously, as that steps up, and then steps up at different rates in different places, so that you've got like rich Californian people doing something before people in another jurisdiction that is maybe less loose with bioethics stuff or whatever, that might have an impact as well, because maybe then 50 years from now, there's some competitive advantage or disadvantage to being in the group that was doing this embryo selection versus another group. It gets super creepy and kind of Darwinian quite quickly, but those are arguably the currents that already shape the differences, or some differences between different places. I'm not talking there about like genetic differences between groups of people, but just
I guess, remind you, we're being filmed here, Jamie.
I mean, differences.
Speak freely.
There are definitely differences in people's biomedical, lives, and how that impacts the fact that one country will have better early childcare intervention and, vaccinations than another place. And that obviously has a drastic difference or impact in the differences between those two places. So yeah, CRISPR, embryo selection, gene therapies for certain diseases. And then I guess the other thing is what people talk about, various implants as well. That is making technological interventions into the body after birth. And again, that's something that already totally exists with things like, just all of the devices that we put in ourselves, like pacemakers and hearing aids and cochlear implants, stents, all that sort of stuff. But obviously that is poised to accelerate to a massive degree in the future, where I assume, and this is one that I don't hear discussed very frequently, but where I assume one of the main things along those lines will be people trying to kind of hack or regulate their endocrine system, or hack or regulate some of the biochemical pathways that are actually the main determinants of how we feel from hour to hour within, day to day, or how we respond to others because of what kind of mood we're in, or how productive we feel during the day and how much work we can get done. All that
Wow, that
stuff
is really interesting.
yeah, because I mean, like in one sense, we already do that because obviously
Yeah, the appetite proclivity is there. Yeah.
and I drink caffeine and all sorts of stuff to try to do that. But if we can actually kind of get into the body and start affecting the flow of some of those hormones and other markers, then that's to me that's an obvious one that people will try to do. And that is an example of, I don't think it's too grand to say that's sort of changing the human condition in a certain way, because it's just changing what it feels like to be alive day to day as a person. So that I think that's a big one.
That's fascinating because I feel like already in the bro science space in particular, you see so many sort of, I mean, not just the bro science, like I guess across all human cultures, you see different forms of trying to re-regulate your lived experience of the world and responses to things. And yeah, that's super fun that there'd be quick, accessible, dramatic hacks for extreme level changes to that. Like I, for example, could just make a few patch changes and have Kobe Bryant's discipline to, or a gym attendant appetite or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
yeah.
wow.
Yeah. Well, exactly. Yeah. So if you buy the idea, and I think there's some truth in this idea, just preface that way. If you buy the idea that, a big difference between, people who have a giant impact in their job, in their family, in their community, whatever, are partly sort of high impact individuals, what some people call high agency individuals, is that they have a kind of biochemistry that's like sort of a few standard deviations away from the mean, just in terms of like how energized they are, and also maybe how disciplined they are. And, like you can see that, I think, I mean, this is like a lame way to do it, but even if you just read biographies of highly influential people, basically the common theme is that, how what we would normally call how driven they are or something like that. Part of that could just be biochemistry. And there's a feedback thing.
I saw some study on startup CEOs and trauma-induced anxiety being like a high, which is, again, like it's that's not a surprising pairing. But then, and to go in the other direction, to think that people will be able to hack their biochemistry to not have stress responses to things that I guess we've had a lot of evolutionary messaging to experience that is now completely useless. I saw a tweet the other day that was like flight freeze is such a funny response to me as an evolutionary thing. Like I'll get an email I don't like and I'll just stare at it, like as though it's going to hurt me if I move or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you've come across this one, Jamie. I heard a study that had mice. This is on, I guess, the genetics, or is it the wrapping of, you'll be better position to tell me, but so a mouse's favorite food is cherries. Mouse will eat cherries, have a great time. They'll give a mouse a cherry that's electrified just once. It'll never see them again or want to go near them. That mouse goes away, has kids. Those kids live their whole lives, never see a cherry. They have kids, and that next generation, the mouse will be offered a cherry, and it's like, no, absolutely no way do I want to eat that cherry because I know that it's going to electrocute me. Obviously, it's not a culturally transferred lesson. There's something going on and it's not genetic because it hasn't evolved to, there haven't been mutant genes to tell the mouse not to eat the electric cherry. There's other things going on there. There must be so many small lessons from our ancestors constantly informing all of our emotional regulation and interactions with the world. To think that you could undo that is like that's a step shift. That's astonishing.
That would be, yeah. So that is an epigenetic effect, yeah. And the famous human equivalent is the Hongerwinter one, the people whose Dutch grandfathers lived through
the electric cherry attack. Sorry.
The Dutch grandfathers who lived through, World War II, as long as they were in a certain age range when that happened, like if they were roughly speaking teenagers under Nazi occupation and they didn't have food basically for a whole winter.
Oh, yeah.
Then downstream, not their children, but their grandchildren have, I can't even remember which way it goes, so they're massively higher or massively lower rates of obesity. It must be massively higher, I would think. But anyway. So then if you're one of those people and you found there was a way that you could hack your biochemistry so that you don't, like you basically have a high-tech version of Ozempic or whatever, so that you aren't affected by your grandfather's experience. Because those things, that was discovered like, 20 years ago or something. Like, this is a totally new area of science. If you can get into those things, you might be able to drastically change your experience. But I should also add, this will be the hardest thing to do ever, like the hardest thing to do well, because even now, obviously, we make all kinds of interventions into our...
Yeah, Ozempic is a great example, right? I mean,
Yeah.
this is great. I've lost a lot of weight from my bone marrow.
So like, the even just trying to, as pharmaceutical companies know, who are essentially trying to just get things inside us through pills. Like, if we wanted to do that on a more built-in, implant kind of basis, it's going to be hard, because you've got one extremely complex system, the endocrine system of hormones and everything happening in your body. And then that's interacting in ways that are unmapped so far with your nervous system, which is also a complex system. And then you've got your gut as well, which is another complex system, and with the microbiome. And so you've got like sort of systems within systems. We don't understand any of them in isolation, and certainly not in conjunction, which is why often when you take a pill with like serious chemicals in it, it has unforeseen side effects. And sometimes it kind of works, but often it doesn't.
And often it's not known why, like,
yeah.
by the researchers. They just happen to notice some side effect, like, oh, great, that's the new function of this thing.
Yeah. So there's all those stories of pharmaceuticals that were intended for one thing, and that in fact, Ozempic, I guess, is again an example of that. I don't think it was originally intended for weight loss. They just found that was a side effect in their population. I think it was originally diabetes, or
yeah, right. That's the Danish that did it.
They were eating too many Danishes, and they were like, this has at least cut down our appetite. So it has worked on that front. Yeah. So I can imagine this in the future. Yeah. Starting with your tech bros or whatever, doing crazy interventions on themselves, and then it gradually fanning out from there. But, it'll probably never be perfect, but it will definitely be impactful.
And that's Harari's, I'm not really interested in his thoughts on the future generally, but that he wrote a whole book about the uneven distribution of that, because it will be, the benefits will be extreme. I don't want to go into his predictions too much, because we're here making our own bold, baseless predictions. That's our grift. Get out of my lane. But when you said the tech bros, like there are a few things where, if you could foresee that, if it's possible that there's some intervention you can have into your body that would make you 100 times more productive, then not everybody's going to get that at once. And the people who do get that are going to be 100, going to reap 100 times the benefits or whatever.
And more able to take advantage of the next
the subsequent wave. Yeah,
totally.
Well, okay, then this just shifts, I think, nicely into then thinking about, well, what are the major problems that we face as a civilization now that we can imagine shifting? When you talked about the smartphone, one of them is, in that instance, I feel like there's I don't know, I was talking to Lucy in this space recently, Lucy Sugarman, about sort of hollowness of meaning and things like that. She's from that Gen Z, that in exactly that window that, was hit with the smartphone and has all the mental health correlated issues. But there are other issues in our contemporary society that, I mean the environmental degradation, or resource consumption, or the inequality of wealth, extreme poverty still exists, disease. Like what are the ones that you can see that we would be able to knock over?
Yeah.
I mean, fusion, there are always those, there's always teams away, as they say. Yeah.
Yes. Well, yeah, fusion would be a big one. I guess any kind of technologies that would massively reduce individuals' carbon consumption, or probably also an industry's carbon consumption as well, would be the big ones, because that would actually start to claw back some of that atmospheric carbon. So yeah, fusion power, big one. And I don't know, I'm not an expert on fusion power at all. And everyone does always say that it's, a few decades away. But my understanding of the basic science, which is itself very basic, my understanding of it, it suggests that it's completely possible. And I think it will certainly exist one day. I mean, it sort of already exists. Like, they already can do a couple of the techniques required to do fusion power, albeit nowhere near at a level of efficiency that makes it worth doing. But I have some genuine hope for fusion power at some point in the future. And then obviously different forms of solar power that might come along as well, just different materials and ways of collecting solar power could also affect people's carbon consumption in like a drastic way. And then, people talk about other things that might lead to lifestyle choices, like, maybe if we're all in the metaverse next year. I mean, everyone's still talking about the metaverse, so that's a
love the
good sign.
metaverse.
Yeah. If we were all in the metaverse in a few years rather than commuting every day, then that would be a big deal. That would change carbon outputs significantly.
I think it's one of those shifting baseline things that because we're born into a society that's of an extreme amount of oil consumption and we've lived in one that's steadily increased, I think we're kind of not day to day. It's very hard to have a cognitive engagement with how much we are an oil-based society and how many minutes do I go without touching something that's oil-based or without, this conversation.
Yeah, well, I guess the big one then is what some people around here actually are starting to talk about. And by around here, I mean some engineers that I know who have plugged a lot of their professional life into the solar revolution. And they're still, involved in that. And they're still involved in, trying to develop smart grids and, all that kind of thing. But they're seriously talking more and more about geoengineering, which was a sort of taboo topic among a lot of environmentalists, at least. But I think is like that's an example of technologies that, again, if they're adopted, will definitely have a big impact, but it is hard to predict in advance how big that impact will be and the negative things that might go along with the positive. Obviously, again, intervening in the Earth's climate systems is, as we've seen, because we've done geoengineering for about 150 years by pumping carbon into the atmosphere. It certainly works. Like, we definitely can do geoengineering. Yeah. We weren't doing it deliberately, but it definitely works. But we're bad at anticipating the flow-on effects. So I can see that kicking off, maybe not even in Western countries initially, but like I see no reason why China, for example, won't continue, because they're already doing a little bit of this, why they won't continue to experiment with crazy geoengineering interventions. So that's a terrifying prospect, but also maybe liberating.
Yeah, maybe. So, like, what's can you say more about what they might be? The only ones that come to mind are sort of drawing down carbon, systems to do that enable you to, keep pumping it out.
Yeah. Well,
but what else is there?
So there's different techniques. So there's stuff like releasing water vapor into the atmosphere to change to increase the amount of sunlight that is reflected back. So you can change so you're sort of altering the greenhouse effect at that stage of things. That's pretty drastic, but like, again, arguably it's just kind of turning up a knob that is sort of already there in nature, and you're just like turning it up a little bit to try and undo some of the effects we've already done. Then there's the kind of more, I think to me, interesting projects that involve actually trying to remove carbon from the atmosphere. Again, we already do this by planting trees, but the idea is to genetically engineer some of these carbon consuming microbes to be safely dispersed in the atmosphere to actually kind of do you think that could go wrong, Chris?
It's like the start of every science fiction book from the 60s.
Exactly. Yeah, that's why I love it. So there's stuff like that as well. And the kind of international law shit show surrounding this is obviously crazy, because the atmosphere is a shared resource, and if one country starts doing it, others might do it or get angry at them. Like, again, I have no idea what the actual repercussions of this would be geopolitically, but scientifically, it's an exciting idea to actually be able to reduce the amount of carbon in the atmosphere rather than just sort of decrease our expulsion of carbon, to actually kind of, to kind of reverse the trend rather than just kind of plateau it off as we're trying to do.
Yeah, one thing
I don't advocate it, but yeah.
Yeah, sure. No, it's just interesting. One thing I've been excited about is, and it's been pretty slow, but actually in the area that I live in, there's I don't know, it feels like even a majority of electric or hybrid cars now. And every time I'm in Sydney in particular, I'm always struck by, oh wow, how nice is this city going to be when there's not petrol exhaust everywhere and noise and traffic itself is such a horribly inefficient system. It'd be so easy to imagine some AI automated algorithm that'll optimize, everyone's journey so that there's, I don't know, that would radically reduce the amount of traffic that exists.
Sorry.
You don't need to apologize.
That's how good I am with technology. Yeah, there's
right-handers.
So again, this is one that people are obviously aiming for, the idea that the self-driving car, and if you have a fleet of electric self-driving cars where, they maintain the perfect distance from one another and they're energy efficient and our roads are cleaner and safer and everything, again, would be massive. That would be presumably an effect on wider infrastructure in society, almost on a par with the development of the automobile originally, which obviously has transformed the Earth's landscape probably more than any other technology there is. That road networks visible from space, and that kind of pretty much determines our geographic layout in which we live. So self-driving cars would be massive. The interesting thing there is that, again, it's a good case study of trying to predict things, because, the Elon Musks of the world were predicting this switch to self-driving electric cars a while ago, and obviously pushing for it because of the climate benefits and other benefits of doing so. But, then you look at how automation has worked, and we've already reached levels of safety and reliability in self-driving cars that are on a par with human drivers. But from a kind of legal and regulatory point of view, that's not enough.
Yeah.
And so people demand a higher than human performance, significantly higher than human performance from any machine, which, it makes some sense. I think what's behind that is the fact that you can't put a machine on trial, whereas you can put a human on trial. So when a human makes an error, there's a sense in which you can recover a cost, even if someone does some terrible road accident, because we have this process of punishing them and, we feel like some justice has been served, we sort of are able to get something back from this terrible event. Whereas in the case of a machine doing it, you can sue the manufacturer, but that doesn't quite carry the same oomph of comeuppance or justice or vengeance that our primate, sort of altruistic punishment craving brains want to happen. So then I would argue that the issue holding back self-driving cars now is something like the project to try and make the road network as regular as possible, so that we can put self-driving cars in there and they never have to even face the kind of crazy outlier situations that do cause accidents, which we sort of are fine with when humans do it, because again, we can kind of punish them. But even though self-driving cars are doing them to a smaller degree, we just will not tolerate them, which is why we are happy to have self-driving trains and trams that run along tracks, because that's a kind of hugely regularized and standardized environment where we can almost eliminate accidents altogether. So we're happy for those to be automated. We're happy for elevators to be automated because they just go up and down. But we're still resistant to fully automated cars because the road network itself is not as chaotic as just everyday life, but almost as chaotic as the general environment, because it's not totally locked down. So to me, that's the bottleneck there with the self-driving car, because I think that would be something that would drastically change the way we live and the way we interact in cities. If we basically got rid of the automobile, not only in terms of its combustion engine and carbon emissions, but also in terms of the way that it,
has
just what a
total
city
it's
is.
the king. Yeah, it's just a total king of the environment.
Yeah. And the I'm going to put in a word here for other people out there who are extremely sensitive to certain loud noises. The audio environment in a city is horrible if you have non-electrified buses, because they're the loudest thing ever. And just non-electrified cars are kind of loud, so that you just have a constant din. And the real
city birds have accents that they've migrated to a higher
frequency to get
decibel. I think it's frequency. Yeah, exactly. To
cut through. Yeah. Wow. Well, look, the real leap in technology that I care about, forget all this, gene editing and whatever, is leaf blowers either being outlawed or made to be quieter. And I know this is mainly my individual preferences here, but
you're not alone.
That would actually change my experience of life, because every morning I have leaf blowers going off in my area. They've improved, I guess. If you do that thing where you just take a photograph of somewhere, maybe it looks nicer now because there's no leaves on any pavements. Every university campus in the world looks great in photographs because they've prioritized what it looks like over what it sounds like. But to be there is a nightmare because there's leaf blowers and other things going on constantly. Anyway, I'm 40, if you had forgotten how old I am. Yeah.
So what else is there in our physical lived experience of the world that could radically change? I guess some sort of it's been so, you referenced the metaverse, and I feel like the steps that we've taken towards sort of immersive technologies have been so sort of piss weak so far. They're kind of laughable, but they wouldn't need to be that much better to have approximate equivalent experiences of reality. And that would radically shift everything.
Well, 100%. Yeah. So that's the thing I'm worried about mainly with AI at the moment. Well, I guess the main thing I'm worried about with AI is its integration with national security and the spooky convergence of, like, the NSA and the big tech companies sharing data. Anyway, that's
Have you just a small sidebar? Have you read about Lavender AI? It's
a little
Israel's
bit.
system. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
A little
We'll,
bit.
we'll
Yeah.
talk about it offline.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. But that's those kinds of systems, and pretty much everything that companies like Palantir are doing.
yeah.
That merging of private and military or intelligence services is just that cannot go well, and is happening. But the other
And
thing I'm
that
worried,
presumably happens before we know about it,
yeah, exactly.
like exclusively. Yeah,
Yeah. But the other thing that I would be really concerned about with AI is, when it goes through maybe a couple more iterations and becomes a new attention technology, sort of like a step change up from, I guess, even the smartphone, which obviously
right.
takes so much of our attention now. And the thing there that I'm worried about is that, well, if you have these companies like Meta or Google or whatever, or Apple even, like, who sort of completely control an individual's flow of information. You're on their social media, you're on their, like, video stream. They're sending you personalized reminders and everything using AI that's trained on your emails and your texts, and is listening into you all the time in your smart home. And so it's bespoke. It's not just sort of some kludgy sort of shooting for the middle crap. It's content that is personally tailored to engage you at the times of day when you're most engageable. And it's learnt all of that, and then can
It's got your
provide
heart rate
it's got you're wearing
and
your
your
fit,
pupil dilation. Yeah, yeah.
exactly, all of that stuff. So then you've got the most curated imaginable feed of information that is optimized solely to have you focused more on that feed of information. And whatever that would be, that would be like, I don't know, a bunch of porn videos for some people, or it would be like a bunch of, outrage inducing news updates for someone else, or
I mean, it's the mix of all of it across your day.
yeah,
As you
it would
said.
be the mix. Yeah, exactly. You want porn in the morning and then outrage in the afternoon, or whatever it is. So, like, that's the thing that I worry about. That is not maybe too far away. The technology probably exists pretty much now to do something like that. And I guess if you just look at what are the big companies that are racing towards AI dominance at the moment are angling for, it's something like that. Like, I almost can't see how this one wouldn't happen. But this is to answer your question, that's the kind of attention-based technology that I'm really concerned about, because that would trap people in their own sort of loop of interest and stimulation to a degree even higher than what we saw with social media and the smartphone.
It's really funny, the current debate in the US around with all the tech companies agitating for opening up the visas so they can get more talented people in. And because I can only see it as, we've got so many morons here, and all we've done is made billions and billions and billions of dollars hijacking everybody's capacity to develop as a person and do anything other than be a drooling moron. And now we need to import people from places that haven't had as many of our products injected into the back of their head.
Yeah.
Well, we're kind of getting to the point of time where I think I should wrap it up, even though there's a billion things we could be talking about. What about for you? Is there anything that is kind of not on people's radar generally that you think that you would like to see that will cause radical improvements or radical changes in a way that you like?
All right. You mean an actual, like, a positive benefit-based technology?
It doesn't have to be, because I assume they're all Pandora's boxes. There's no escaping.
Yeah.
Most of it, but is there something that you've come across? I can't wait for that to happen. I'm so jazzed about asteroid mining. Because for me, I always think, because I'm in a winter environment and dressing a baby and a toddler each day. I'm like, I cannot wait until there's a robot that could just strap this suit onto my toddler for me. I mean, I don't actually mean that now, because I love it, but at first it was so annoying. There must be just so many small tasks like that like robotics will be able to replace not dressing our kids. That's probably a bit too far. But
yeah. Look, that's
flossing your teeth. You just open your mouth, the nanobots fly in. Game changed.
Game changer.
Yeah,
that's such a great question, Chris. Yeah, I it's so funny. Nothing comes to mind, which is itself a big indictment of the landscape. But that's because, like, it all of even the ones that seem to be positive are kind of Pandora's boxes. But also, that's not me being, super cynical. Some of them might have unforeseen upsides and benefits that are way better than we can imagine, kind of thing. Like, I mean, again,
like killing all the sparrows.
The historical example of vaccines is interesting because, like, there's obviously an anti-vaxxer movement that somehow exists, even though it seems like it's the most unequivocally beneficial thing that's probably ever happened in the history of human life. But also, it's kind of one of those things where the positive impact just becomes like invisible because, of course, you don't see the people don't walk around with like a skull and crossbones on their forehead if they were like, I would have died during childhood if not for my vaccine, kind of thing. But if I was president for a day, maybe that would be how it works. But like that's the positive.
I can see how popular it'll be with your skull and bones compulsory tattoo.
Take that, RFK.
I'm pretty
Jr.
sure I'm the good guy.
But yeah, so like it's so funny. No, none of those super positive things that maybe aren't on the radar really leap to mind.
What about things that are exciting to you? Like not needing to get into cars or not needing to, like what you mentioned leaf blowers. Maybe that's something we can do.
That's all I can think about.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. It's
the
so funny
of leaves
because so much of my job is kind of like pulling down the hype of various technologies. So it's hard to kind of get out of that headspace. Like, for example, you mentioned there the dream of a domestic robot, which is one area that has massive investment at the moment. Like that is kind of the other side of AI investment away from large language models and stuff like that is in robotics. And arguably the gains that have happened the last few years have really been in robotics, although we've had our attention captured by ChatGPT and other things like that. If you look at what Tesla and NVIDIA and some startups are doing in terms of this dream of having a general purpose domestic robot who can, and these are the examples that they always put in the marketing literature and the academic literature, fold laundry and stack a dishwasher. And I guess floss your teeth, I know that's a kind of weird one, but maybe dress an infant would be in the same category. And this is the holy grail of robotics, because if someone had an actual domestic robot that could fold laundry and stack the dishwasher, the idea is that, well, every household actually would want to buy one of those because it would be a butler, it would be a servant, it would be, dare I say, close to a slave. But it is very hard to develop such a robot. And the problems there are not so much with what they thought the problems were. There are certain problems, like just getting a robot to grasp an object is a super hard problem, and that's taken decades of like the smartest people working on it to make any headway. But then even beyond that, there are some problems with the nature of those tasks being, again, super specific to the particular household that you would be in. And so I won't go into all the details, but like...
Sure. I can imagine.
Yeah, I call it the ornamental mug problem. To just, if you get the robot to stack the dishwasher, but it turns out there's some mug that looks like a mug and its vision sensors tell it that it's a mug, and its, grasping algorithms know how to pick up mugs and everything, and they put it in the dishwasher, but it turns out it was your ornamental mug. That's for whatever reason.
All right.
Yeah, exactly. You've just, grandma's ashes have gone through the whatever. I don't know why you're keeping them in like an ordinary mug, but I'm not going to judge you for that.
Please, yeah.
But that's an example where it doesn't matter how sophisticated the processing is in a robot. Extract that information from the environment, because that information is not in the environment, it's in your personal history. So it would had to have been privy to all that. And the only way it could do that is if it had learnt from your household specifically and tracked all of your movements and had access to your smart home data and had learned all your emails and blah, 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 which again, as I said, is coming. But that is a separate problem that is being solved by big tech companies. But the domestic robot will not come along, I think, until that problem is solved. But by that stage, we will have relinquished everything to these big tech companies. All of our intimate data, that having a robot to fold our laundry will, I think, be a Pyrrhic victory at best.
Do you think that there are social... Is it exciting to think, because this is something you also must spend a lot of your time working on, is it exciting to think about how the social systems that we have, evolved through a different set of human capabilities and technologies, and are now, many of them are now redundant or are completely, you could foresee how they could be totally replaced and radically improved. Are there exciting frontiers there for you?
Actually, and I'm glad you asked me that, because that does prompt something that I'm excited about, which is potential changes to what you might call democratic technologies.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, I guess the advent of democracy itself was arguably a kind of, institutional technology, if you want to call it that just like massively changed the usual power relations between the powerful and the powerless. So that, okay, now you give power to like, a few people, and they are allowed to tell you what to do and literally write the laws for the place and, run everything. But in return for that, you can sack them. So the overall populace has power over this few in one way, even though power is still day-to-day concentrated in their hands. And that's kind of like a cool thing. You again, if it was like before the advent of democracy, you might not have predicted that was even possible. Like that's didn't seem to be the way that human affairs generally ran. Normally you had just a pyramid with the strongest or most endowed people on top, or whatever it was. So there some? Sorry,
the most what?
Well, yeah, sorry. By endowed, I guess I meant they're like the ones who had inherited wealth and stuff like that. I definitely should have thrown in at least another adjective to make that clear.
It's good.
But like the democracy technology has not really been updated in hundreds of years, or if not thousands of years.
If anything, it's been downdated.
It has.
Yeah.
Totally. But there are on the horizon some really cool experiments. Like, I don't know if you've heard of this thing called quadratic voting, which is a great idea. And there's kind of a community of weird sort of alternative economists and stuff like that in America who've tried to get this going. I think they even trialed it in Colorado at one point.
Fantastic.
And what it is just a way of, rather than every person having just like one vote that has to somehow convey information about like every policy and issue per person. So that, I am an idiot and I go to the polls and don't know anything about anything and just vote randomly for some person. Whereas next to me in the booth next to me is someone who actually knows everything about a particular issue. And so their vote should be carrying as much information as possible about this, leaf blower issue or whatever. But then they don't know about anything else. So they this is obviously a terrible and inefficient system. So quadratic voting gives you like a kind of stack of, 40 voting credits or whatever, which you can then kind of allocate to different elections for different things. But the trick here is that if you want to kind of double down on some issue because you really care about it or are really informed about it, each extra vote you want to add actually costs more and more. So it goes up quadratically so that you can allocate one vote. Right. If you want to allocate more, you need to add 4 on top of that. And if you want to allocate more, you need to add 16 on top of that or whatever. So it's a way of counteracting people who just go in there and try to stack elections. You can sort of stack an election, but you have to really, really care about it, because then you've just lost all your votes for other issues. That's a very kludgy explanation of it.
That's fun. It's also totally foreseeable that you could have a conversation with a chatbot for 5 minutes now, and that could, split your votes or a portion, not even votes, just like down to direct democracy. Oh, it looks like everybody broadly wants this particular thing done. And that gets you into a whole lot of philosophical problems immediately. Not only would people not trust such a system, but also, do you really want society that enacts the will of the people in that way?
Yeah.
Do we collectively want that? Probably not.
Yeah. But that,
execute them, nuke this country, whatever. Maybe we do want that. Who am I to stand in the way of true progress? This is great, Jamie.
But that's where I'd look for actual positive things, is democratic technologies.
Yeah, I love it. I think we could maybe talk for a whole hour just on that topic, and maybe we will again soon. Thank you so much for joining us again, Jamie.
My pleasure, Chris.
Yeah, I love chatting to you, and it's a real gift, and I hope the listeners do too. And see you next time.
Right, see ya.
Thanks so much for listening. If you like this episode, please share it with a friend who needs it. And if you really loved it, you can check out my Patreon via the link below and in the show notes. Please also like, subscribe. It really does make a big difference. Also, by becoming a patron, you get access to bonus content, longer interviews, and live AMAs, all for as little as $5 a month. And I think it's a pretty good deal. Jamie is a wonderful man, and you can find his work on his Substack. I think I'll put the link in the comments, but it's the Stark Ways He's widely followed. He looks across a number of beautiful topics. He says, big ideas, no wishful thinking, AI, meaning, nukes, books, and brains. I think you'll agree that he's a wonderful thinker. And go check him out. Support him as well. Thanks so much. Have a great day.